Hello students, today we'll read Chapter 4, Tribals, DIKUS and the Vision of a Golden Age History Part 4. Today we'll focus on how did colonial rule affect tribal lives. What happened to tribal chiefs? Before the arrival of the British, in many areas the tribal chiefs were important people. They enjoyed a certain amount of economic power and has the right to administer and control their territories. In some places, they had their own police and decided on the local rules of land and forest management. Under the British rule, the function and powers of the tribal chiefs changed considerably. They were allowed to keep their land titles over a cluster of villages and rent out lands, but they lost much of their administrative powers and were forced to follow laws made by British officials in India. They also had to pay a tribute to the British and discipline the tribal groups on the behalf of the British. They lost the authority they had earlier enjoyed amongst their people and were unable to fulfill their traditional functions. Now let's focus on what happened to the shifting cultivators. The British were uncomfortable with groups who moved about and did not have a fixed home. They wanted tribal groups to settle down and become peasant cultivators. Settled peasants were easier to control and administer than people who were always on the move. The British also wanted a revenue resource for the state, so they introduced land settlements, that is, they measure land and fix the revenue demand for the state. Some peasants were declared landowners, other tenants. The tenants were to pay rent to the landowners, who in return paid revenue to the state. The British effort to settle Jhum cultivators was not very successful. Settle plough cultivation is not easy in areas where water is scarce and soil is very dry. In fact, Jhum cultivators who took to plough cultivation often suffered since their field did not produce good yields. So the Jhum cultivators in northeast India insisted to continue with their traditional practice. Facing widespread protest, the British had to ultimately allow them the right to carry on shifting cultivation in some parts of the forests. Let's focus on forest laws and their impact. The British extended their control over all forests and declared that forests were state property. Some of the forests were classified as reserved forests for they produced timber which the British wanted. In these forests, people were not allowed to move freely, practice Jhum cultivation, collect fruits, or hunt animals. Many were therefore forced to move to other areas in search of work and livelihood. But once the British stopped the tribals from living inside the forest, they faced a problem. From where would the forest department get its labor to cut trees for railway sleepers and to transport logs? Colonial officials came up with a solution. They decided that they would give them June cultivators small patches of land in the forest and allow them to cultivate these on the condition that those who lived in the villages would have to provide labor in the forest department and look after the forest. In so many regions, the forest department established forest villages to ensure a regular supply of cheap labor. Many tribals reacted against the colonial forest laws. They disobeyed the new rules, continued with practices that were declared illegal, and at times rose in open rebellion. The revolt of Songram Sangam in 1906 in Assam and the forest satyagraha of the 1930s in the central provinces are the examples. The problem with trade. During the 19th century, tribal groups found that traders and money lenders were coming into the forest more often, waiting to buy forest produce, offering cash loans, and asking them to work for the wages. It took tribal groups some time to understand the consequences of what was happening. An example, in the 18th century, Indian silk was in demand in European market. The fine quality of Indian silk was highly valued and exports from India increased rapidly. As the market expanded, East India Company officials tried to encourage silk production to meet the growing demand. Hazaribagh in present-day Jharkhand was an area where the Santals reared cocoons. The traders dealing in silk sent in the agents who gave loans to the tribal people and collected the cocoons. The growers were paid rupees 3 to rupees 4 for 1,000 cocoons. These were then exported to Burden or Gaya, where they were sold at 5 times the price. The middlemen, so called because they arranged deals between the exporters and the silk growers, made huge profits. The silk growers earned very little. Understandably, many tribal groups saw the market and the traders as their main enemies. That's all for today. The next part will continue in the next session. Thank you. Happy watching.